Hello and welcome back to Meet the Content Creator. Today we have Jack Badelaire, and he is a writer. So say hello.
Hey, Peter. Nice to meet you.
Good to hear from you. So we're trying to keep it a kind of much shorter, compact interview rather than the others pushing hours. So, what made you actually become a writer?
Uh, a lot of writers have different origin stories. I'm kind of the cliche of someone who has just always had a drive to write, to create worlds and characters and throw them into conflict. I always say that I drew stories before I wrote them. I would draw out little scenarios and scenes with stick figures on big sheets of art paper when I was a little kid. And as I got older, I would write little stories for all my course assignments in grade school. When I was a teenager, I got into Dungeons and Dragons mostly because it was a really great place to create worlds and characters and throw them into conflict and, create stories with my friends. Uh, that continued on into high school where I started learning film and television production and screenwriting and was a minor in classical studies because I've always had an interest in history. And as time went on, I created a book review blog called Postmodern Pulps, where I reviewed old 60s, 70s, and 80s paperbacks. And eventually, I became aware of this thing called independent publishing, where people were either republishing old works that they had regained the rights to, or there were people kind of like myself who'd always wanted to get into writing professionally or semi-professionally, but never wanted to endure the grind of finding an agent and querying with publishers. So at that point, I did a lot of homework. I dug into the subject matter of both the technical aspects of publishing and the craft of writing, in a more prose fiction kind of way rather than screenwriting or game writing. And
So, have you
eventually,
found that? I didn't realize there was almost different styles. I'm assuming there must be different styles of writing, but didn't realize it was you could almost learn each different style. So you went down the prose writing. So almost I'm guessing that's the book writing side of things.
yeah, especially it's one thing writing little stories, that just kind of keep your brain running. A few pages here, a few pages there, school assignments and things like that, as opposed to sitting down and writing, 100,000 word novel. My debut novel, Killer Instincts, is something like 93,000 words. Before that, I published a couple of little short stories. I wrote a ghost story called Rivalry, and I wrote sort of a sword and sorcery pastiche called Nanak and the Tower of Sorrows. And I put those out as kind of a way to train myself in the process of not only formatting a manuscript for uploading, but the art of getting someone to do a cover design for you or building a cover yourself and uploading it and how to handle the trials and tribulations of people reviewing your work and handling that, the training wheels before you actually put a novel out there. And I think that was around 2012. So it's about been 10 years. And it's been 9 novels, 4 novellas, and a handful of short stories.
You said you started with Dungeons and Dragons and the fantasy genre, and you had that liking to history. So, explain more about yeah, your novels around that. Which one do you start with?
So my very first novel, even though it took place a few years in the past, I wrote it in 2011 and it takes place in 2001. But that was sort of a contemporary story. Beyond that, almost all of my stuff has been what I call historical action adventure. The bulk of it's been my Commando series, which is 6 novels and a handful of short stories uh, that focus around a troop of British commandos in the early stages of the war. I've got another book It's called Assault on Abbeville in my Revenant series. It's only one book right now, but that's another World War II story around a group of five sort of unconventional saboteur type guys.
SOE type
I
stuff.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, Sort of dirty dozen. The shtick of it is that they're all men who've been declared dead by their respective countries, and therefore can operate behind enemy lines, or written off and deniable. I've also written a novel, San Francisco Slaughter, that takes place in the 70s, is more sort of a vigilante crime story. My novella, Renegade's Revenge, is a Western. So
Wowza.
almost the entirety of my catalog is historical in some fashion or another.
Okay, fantastic. And there's awful lot. How do you do your background reading on these areas? Where would you go?
I bought a lot of books. The thing is, when you're an author as opposed to just a general student of history, you read and you research and you buy your materials um, with a focus. So, it's always a little awkward whenever I run into someone who's a huge fan of World War II. And being British, I'm sure you know many people who are deeply into World War II.
Yeah,
And then they start going on about, some battle or some regiment or whatever, expecting me to be able to engage with them on it. And I just kind of shrug and I'm like, man, you know what, man? It was a big war. There were a
yeah.
lot of people fighting in it. I don't know everything about it. I wrote a novel about the Vogso raid in December of 1941, Operation Archery. I probably read, I don't know, 5, 6 books about that. So yeah, I could talk to someone all day about the Vogso raid, but some other battle in some other place around the globe, I don't know.
It's huge.
You kind of really do have to pick and choose what you do the deep dive on in order to do your story. And it is important because people will call you out on little details. I always joke that you can completely change the course of the war in your novel, but if you write about an MG-42 in 1939, someone is going to rip you apart for it. So those little details for many readers are actually more important than the overarching accuracy of the history of what goes on in your book.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I can there's mind you, a YouTube is awash of those sorts of videos saying where did Battlefield get it wrong, etc., and all that sort of good, well, semi good stuff. I think it doesn't it helps in some areas, helps in some areas and hinders in others. So how hard it is how so I'm assuming you started by getting being self-published. How hard was that to get off the ground?
uh, so I teach an introduction to self-publishing course. I've done so
Okay.
for a few years now, and it's actually easier. It's all depends on your end goal. If you want to simply put a story out there for the world to read, assuming you are not objectively a terrible writer, and assuming that you have some understanding of computer literacy, file formats, formatting text documents properly, uh, hyperlinks, things like that. It's really something that anyone can do. If you've
Hmm.
got a computer, if you have word processing software, if you have a connection to the internet, anyone can do this. To do it right, to make money, real money off of it, is another journey altogether. But it really does depend on what your end goal is. When I first started out, I decided that my end goal was $100 a month in royalties. If I could make that, what I called like one big pizza party a month kind of money, then I'd be happy. And my first year, I hit $60. And then my second year, I hit $600.
Wow.
And then my third year, uh, I can't remember, but it was well into the thousands of dollars. and continued on that way for a few years. Uh, Things have quieted down for me. I haven't published as much lately. Things in my real life and my work have just been a lot more complicated, and I kind of just not have had the headspace to do it.
Mm.
I did publish a 30,000 word fantasy novella last year. I'm working on the sequel right now. But the days of me earning over $1,000 a month in royalties, they're a few years in the past. But I still make money on stuff that I published, 8, 9 years ago. So it's something that if you have the skill to learn a few basic techniques and you're not objectively a terrible writer, and that is important, you do need to be able to write fairly well in order to not get obliterated in Amazon reviews.
All
Uh,
right. Okay.
it's
So,
possible for anyone to do this. You just have to be realistic about the scale of your end goal. Are you looking to just do it for the sake of getting a story out into the world, which is a totally legitimate thing,
mm,
and you're not worried about making money? Then you can do it. If you're considering the idea of becoming a full-time writer and actually living off your royalties, there are more people doing that than you might think, especially in certain genres like romance. Surprisingly, westerns. I know a number of
okay.
people who make it big writing westerns. It's sort of bounced back in the last few years. My publisher, Wolfpack Publishing, cut its teeth on republishing old westerns and now publishes new ones, and they're incredibly popular. It's self-publishing is really about finding a narrow but deep readership within your niche and going for it.
Hmm.
That's how I sold tens of thousands of copies of books about British commandos, which I had no idea anyone would really care about. Was because at the time, about 10 years ago, there really weren't that many people who were writing and publishing new stories about World War II action adventure fiction.
No, I must say, being this side of the pond where the commandos are revered in some respects, yeah, I can't think of anything, any big stories. I mean, even the big, yeah, I can't think of any big stories. And how much does that? Do you find that across, thank that you do the commandos? Do you find it's more popular in Europe or in America, because they have their hold in the same regard? I appreciate you're obviously an American publisher.
Right. In the beginning, within the first few years, probably the first 2 or 3, I actually sold almost 3 to 1 sales in the UK versus the US.
Yeah.
So easily triple the numbers in the UK. As time went on, uh, that changed and it became more US heavy simply because the population, so much bigger. But my success early on was driven very heavily by UK readers.
Fan-
So, oh
Fantastic.
yeah.
So where can we find your books? Where can we buy
So
them?
you can go to my website, jackbadelaire.com, and I have links there under my books header for everything. It'll take you right to Amazon. For those people in the UK, you may just have to shift your store around. I don't. The links will take you to the US store. But if you go to Amazon and you type Jack Badelaire in there, you'll find me. I've got an Amazon author page, and that links to all my materials there.
Fantastic. And we're coming towards the end now. It's hitting the 15-minute mark. So, uh, what is your favorite topping on your pizza then? You like your pizzas?
Oh man, people are gonna hate me for it, but I love Hawaiian pizza, pineapple and Canadian bacon. I'm all about that. Or prosciutto and pineapple. Oh, so good. And if people
Fantastic.
are gonna hate me for that, I do also love buffalo chicken. That's another fantastic one, and a little less controversial.
Yes, there's always people who don't like pine. I can't stand pineapple on it either, but it's not to that sort of hatred. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I much appreciate it. The links to the links to everything for all the books and the bookstore will definitely be down in the description. So have a little look, and we might actually, if I remember it, put it up in the top left-hand corner as well. So, and thank you very much. So say goodbye.
All right. Thank you very much, Peter. Glad to be here. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you very much too. Anyway, until next time, folks. Bye-bye.
If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like and subscribe on Peter's channel. Check out the other videos that we have here on the screen. And if you're interested, you can find me at jackbadelaire.com in the links below. Have a good one.